the recording after we're done, okay?
Inshallah.
We are on. Go ahead.
Bismillah. Hello, gentlemen. We're back with another In Context. Today, we're discussing the topic of the country of Lebanon, in particular, the reorganization of Lebanon after the Israeli military actions, which unfortunately are ongoing. I think they just bombed yesterday. So we need to look at the country as a whole and not just what Hezbollah is going to do. I believe I put it in context. I'll leave it to you.
Okay, thank you. Today is Sunday, February 23rd. Just so the context of what we're doing is obvious. So first, I'd like to just describe what we had before the war. Before the war, Lebanon was completely dominated by Hezbollah. The government was dominated by an alliance between Hezbollah and Maronite faction led by Michel Aoun. There were other players, but they were not getting very far. The US and its allies put the country under economic pressure after the Ponzi scheme that was running the economy collapsed in 2018, 2019. So it was a sort of closed sandbox for Hezbollah. That's the setup or background going into the war in 2023. I just want to recall that the US, throughout the war, insisted that it does not want the war to expand, and it emphasized this openly and privately to Iran and Hezbollah that it does not want them to interfere in the war. As a result, Hezbollah limited its interference to gaining tactical advantage by claiming the right to go tit for tat with Israel. However, when Israel was done with destroying Gaza, the US didn't mind when Israel expanded the war and went after Hezbollah, meaning that the US royally double-crossed Iran and Hezbollah. However, in the end, when the ceasefire was imposed, the guarantor of the ceasefire was Israel. Well, sorry, was the US, which is very interesting. I think it shows that at the end of the day, even though the US inflicted a very significant blow on Iran, because that's the jewel of the crown, Hezbollah in Lebanon, on Iran. Iran in the end has limited options because it wants to be part of the international order. So all it could do is keep going, absorb the blow and keep going. That is the strategic context. Beyond this, we probably want to go into the details of the internal politics in Lebanon. So I'd cede back to Joseph to get his read on this, and then we can go back to the details of the internal situation.
I have my internet totally disconnected for about a minute there. So what was the main point you just made so I can respond to it?
Sure. You can edit later,
Yeah.
Danny. Okay.
Yeah.
So what I was saying is the general strategic context is before the war, Hezbollah dominated Lebanon in alliance with Michel Aoun, the Maronite. It was back then the dominant Maronite faction. There were attempts by Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and other openly pro-US countries to try to exercise influence in Lebanon, but it was getting nowhere. The US imposed an economic blockade on Lebanon after the economic system failed. It was a Ponzi scheme, actually, and the Ponzi scheme collapsed in 2019. So it was essentially a sandbox for Hezbollah, a closed sandbox for Hezbollah. During the war, the US inflicted a double cross on Iran and Hezbollah. It impressed on them that they should not interfere in the war. they are not allowed to expand the war, but nobody else is also allowed to expand the war. However, as soon as Israel was done with Gaza, the US didn't mind at all when Israel expanded the war. Actually, they supported expanding the war. So the US inflicted a significant blow on Iran and Hezbollah. However, when the ceasefire was implemented, the guarantors were declared as the US and France. France being next to the US means just the US, really. What that reflects is the fact that Iran, at the end of the day, wants to be part of an international order that is dominated by the US, so it has no option but to accept whatever the US submits to it. That was the strategic context. So what I was doing as you came back is I was feeding back to you so you can, give you an input on the strategic context before we enter into the specifics of the internal and regional politics of Lebanon and how they are going to be restructured as, beyond the October 7th.
Yeah. Okay, good. Okay, well, regarding the strategic context, I largely agree with what you said there. I think that obviously things have not been going well for Iran in recent months, say years at this point. And I think that not only is it about becoming a part of the international community so they can't cross the American lines too much, but even internally within Iran, which I do follow a little bit, even some of their hardline newspapers are trying to create a space for dialogue with the Iranian regime and Trump. Now, how serious they are about that, I don't know. Will Khamenei actually entertain that? Well, repeatedly he said he wouldn't. But, there's multiple layers of politics that go on in Iran. And one good way to read what's actually sort of going on in the minds of these people who have some power and influence is to look at their hardline newspapers. And you see a lot of stuff that sort of indicates a willingness by some actors within the more hardline coalition to consider engaging with Trump and trying to find a way to reach some kind of agreement with the United States. So with that in mind, in the necessity of keeping doors open, I think Iran realizes that this is not the time for them to really put their entire regime on the line. And, with the loss of Syria, it's going to be much more difficult for them to replenish and support Hezbollah in Lebanon. So I think, as you sort of hinted at, or you've made the point, right now they're just sort of, as you said earlier, playing the long game. I agree with that. I don't think Iran's going to give up on their aspirations in Lebanon or with Hezbollah, though I think they're going to have to rethink their strategies. And I think Hezbollah's, undeniably they're weakened. We can't deny that in any way, shape, or form. But that doesn't mean they're gone. And it doesn't mean that their overall strategy is going to radically change in the long term that much. But I think, without a doubt, a midterm, short-term reset is necessary. And we just saw today, though, look at the power they still have and influence. That was a massive funeral. And some reports had over 1 million people were at Nasrallah's funeral today. I mean, that's a big funeral. So it's not like these guys have lost all their support. And in the end, for any movement or regime or paramilitary or whatever you want to call it to be successful, you need to have some support. And obviously, Hezbollah still has popular support amongst the people who probably have always followed them in the first place. So, that sort of signifies that they're not going anywhere anytime soon. That's sort of how I see it.
Yeah. So that actually starts out on the looking at the internal realignments in Lebanon. So the fundamental realignment I see is actually on the Maronite side of the picture in Lebanon. So on the rest of the Lebanon's politics are sectarian. So it's sect-wise. And the only sectarian change is actually on the Maronite side. So the current ascendant faction is the Phalangist party and its offshoots, the Lebanese forces. These guys are close allies of Israel, Saudi Arabia, and the UAE. They have been allowed into government to replace the Michel Aoun faction, which is allied with Hezbollah. The Michel Aoun faction is also pro-West, but the fundamental differences actually have to do with their regional alignments. So they are not allied with Israel, unlike the Phalangist Lebanese forces groups. The other important change in internal politics is before the war, Israel was not part of the political scene in Lebanon. After the war hasn't ended, but after the start of war, Israel now has been allowed by the US to become a political player in Lebanon, directly through its forces and continued bombing, which the US tolerates, although officially it has committed a ceasefire to prevent that, but also through their allies who have been now allowed into government and to play a more prominent political role in Lebanon. However, as Joseph was saying, Hezbollah is here to stay. The show Hezbollah made today of the funerals is part of their standard operating procedure. So in previous occasions with Hezbollah faced setbacks in 2005 and beyond that, they have always resorted to these kinds of mass demonstrations to show power and to show that they have a backstop and they can't be discounted. So that's what they're doing again now. So this is standard, nothing news. But the fact that they have been allowed to name their own ministers in the current government shows that although the current government is sponsored by the US and its overt allies in Saudi Arabia and UAE, this is not an attempt to eliminate Hezbollah from Lebanon because it cannot be eliminated, and they realize that. So it's here to stay. So what we have in Lebanon right now is more of a managed competition. What we had before was complete domination of Hezbollah. That is a different situation. But all what it means is the Middle East as a whole is moving from a period of stagnation to a period of reformulation. How would it look like? Is not an obvious. It's not obvious right now. Joseph,
yeah, I think I agree with that. Like we definitely see a shift in the Maronite Christian political bloc in power, but as you made the point, Hezbollah still has ministers, and it's not like they've been completely kicked out and excluded from the government, and nor does it look like they'll be consolidating and joining in with the Lebanese military anytime soon either. That's not going to happen. We were discussing that before. They're not going to become integrated in the Lebanese armed forces. So with that being said, the political situation will remain. It'll change, but for what direction, who knows at this point. I mean, daily life in Lebanon is hard for the people living there. Even when I went there 10 years ago, I mean, there are a lot of very poor people there, and it's a society that I think has a lot of wealth inequality. I met some professors who were making American level salaries, and then I met other people that were shining shoes and asking for $1. And I just saw it. You could feel that deep economic disparity. You see some people wearing Prada and other people wearing clothes that looked like they were ripped up, and it really is like that. And I was in Beirut in the wealthy part. So I have no idea if I would have gone to the southern part what I was seeing, but it probably would have been even more obvious and stark, the contrast. So I guess the point I'm trying to make is this. In order for this country to ever find its way forward, it has to stabilize its economy. And I just don't know how that's going to happen with constant U.S. interference, with Israeli incursions. I mean, you'd be crazy to invest anything serious in Lebanon if you're a foreigner right now, because it could very well be blown up by Israeli forces. So that this puts the country in a situation where it's not attractive for foreign investment, and there's obviously lots of sectarianism and internal corruption. And it just seems like I don't know what the path forward for the country is right now. And sadly, it looks like it's not, I don't see a very bright, short to midterm for whatever's going on right now. I really don't know. I would like to hear your opinion on how are people living there going to handle all this, and how will their sentiments impact the political foreign policy decision making? Will the people's unhappiness impact this, or does the ruling parties not care and they're going to do what they got to do in terms of foreign policy and dealing with Israel?
So because of the sectarian setup of Lebanon, the way the population behaves is as sects protecting the sect privileges. That means that the political system is actually closed. So each sect has its own warlords, and those warlords essentially act as little monarchies. There are something like 5 or 6 little monarchies in the within Maronites. There are a couple of very ineffectual, you can't even call them monarchies, in the quote-unquote Sunni faction. There is just one in the Shia faction. There is 1.5 in the Druze faction. The half is in remission. And as a result, it doesn't seem that internally something is going to happen. However, what people forget is Lebanon actually is not a state. Lebanon is just a cut off of Syria. And what we're seeing right now is just a reassession of this. So the Israeli policy in Lebanon is just part of its policy in the northern front. So Netanyahu today, for example, makes claims on southern Syria.
Mm.
Okay. At the same day, while he is making claims on Beirut, his planes were flying over the funerals in Beirut. And Israel is essentially saying, we see this as one meal. The truth is, now that the Assad regime has collapsed, this opens a lot of possibilities both ways. There is a lot, however, there is a huge amount of foolishness going on in Syria right now. So the same people who are celebrating the funeral of Hassan Nasrallah are mourning the Israeli designs on Syria. Same people, which is an act of royal stupidity. Because, aside from the fact that Hezbollah being a criminal organization, this is not in debate. Israel is a settler colonial project, which is, more obscene than being just Nazi. That's the options. You don't choose your fights when you are on the back, the back foot, which is the case now in Syria and Lebanon. These are the options: a criminal organization or a settler colonial project. So those who are complaining about settler colonial project cannot at the same time celebrate the demise of an enemy of the settler colonial project. It's really stupid. And the problem is, this is not merely the doing of the Saudi talking heads, which are pushing us the sectarian message, but also a lot of fools.
Interesting.
The same individuals who are warning of the Israeli project in southern Syria are celebrating the demise of Hezbollah. Same individuals. It's insanity. Back to you, Joseph.
Yeah, I mean, well, I don't know. It's hard for me at least to understand. I mean, I don't even know how to respond, to be honest. Like, I can understand why people living in Syria are happy to see the demise of Hezbollah. It's hard to understand. I mean, what they went through with basically Hezbollah keeping Assad in power for many years towards the end there. I don't see how you can be a serious Sunni and not feel some sense of happiness that this criminal organization, as you call it, is it's finally on the back foot, at least in Syria. And uh, at the same time, though, I can also understand why obviously people in Syria are not all too happy about the idea of Israel continuing to interfere and occupy territory, and even talking about now, once again, demilitarizing southern Syria, which I heard Netanyahu say today. That obviously is something that people in Syria should find problematic. So I don't know if I necessarily see these two positions as mutually exclusive as you seem to see them. I've been in touch with a lot of people, including people I know who are Syrian refugees here in Bosnia, who, quite honestly, might harbor as much animosity towards Hezbollah as they do Israel. These people suffered not at the hands of Israel, but at the hands of Assad's forces. The people who are here in Bosnia, living as refugees, running restaurants, doing what they can to survive, in some cases begging for change, they're not here because of Israel directly. They're here because of Assad. So I can sort of I don't see why it's so mutually exclusive. Maybe strategically it's foolish. I don't know. We can talk. That's a different discussion. But in a moral, from a moral perspective, I don't know if I agree that it's. I think it makes sense to not like either.
So I'll make two arguments here. The first is just moral. You don't get your revenge at the hands of your enemies. Revenge at the hands of your enemies is not revenge. It's a theft of your revenge. It's a defeat. So no, if anybody thinks that they have achieved the revenge against the criminal who killed them, they haven't. It was stolen from them and from me. Because yes, he committed crimes against the Ummah of Islam, not Sunnis, the Ummah of Islam, when he supported this corrupt regime in Syria. There is no debate about that. But then that was a crime against the Ummah, and the Ummah should take its revenge, not wait for its enemy to take its revenge. That is actually theft of our revenge. So no, morally, this is really corrupt. You don't take your revenge at the hands of your enemies. That's one. The second is from strategic point of view. The question is, who is your present danger and who is not? Right now, Hezbollah is in a mission. It's not threatening to occupy Syria. It cannot occupy Syria. It does not have the potential to commit these crimes again. Okay, but Israel was, and will be. So people need to have a brain and a set of priorities.
I mean, in my opinion, I think the only thing that's going to secure Syria against Israeli aggression is getting Turkey down there to basically act as peacekeepers. I don't see Syrian army right now being able to challenge Israel in any meaningful way. I do think would have to. I mean, I don't know what other alternative there is other than having Turkish troops spotted around the country, especially in the south, to ensure that Israel doesn't go too overboard with whatever it is they have planned. I don't see an alternative. What do you see?
No, I don't. I'm not actually the current tactic they are taking, which is just absorb the blows, is quite reasonable. I'm not debating that. Because if they don't absorb the blows, then their options are either get into a war that they will lose royally, or give in significant lasting political concessions. So it's either military defeat or political defeat. So the current tactic they are using is reasonable. I'm not debating that. But then you have to move on from this stand. The issue of Turkey interfering, I'm not sure about that. Turkey is a member of NATO. Israel is a protectorate of NATO. And as a result, I'm not sure that the Turkish government has a lot of leeway to act in Syria. And even if it has a leeway to act in Syria, maybe as far as Homs, but no farther. Because the US wouldn't allow that. I don't think so.
Well, I mean, the way NATO's going right now, especially with Trump's comments, the U.S. there might not be in NATO, or at least the U.S. might not be in NATO, so that could change the calculus quite a bit. I personally think, again, I think Turkey is a country that generally will do what it wants to do, regardless of what the protocols are. I mean, nobody really wanted them in northern Syria this whole time, but they've been there and they clearly aren't leaving. So I don't know. I think if the situation got too out of control, it's in Turkey's interest to prevent Syria from falling into another protracted conflict, because those refugees are going right back into Turkey. Erdogan knows if him and his party or whoever it is that runs in the next election want any chance of winning, they have to end this refugee situation. And anything that's going to put at risk that, the success they've recently had in getting people to go back to Syria is Turkey's going to, I think Turkey would do whatever it has to do, including going against the UN and NATO, to avoid the unthinkable, which is all those refugees filtering right back into Turkey, because that indeed would be the death knell of the AKP and Erdogan's regime. I think that's like the one thing that he can get away with a bad economy, he can get away with other things, but I think these refugees coming back would be absolutely catastrophic to him and his party. So with that in mind, I think Turkey is willing to do whatever it takes to make sure Syria remains at least stable enough that those refugees will continue leaving Turkey and going back home.
Yeah, I'm not debating that they have an interest in this. What I'm saying is there are constraints on how far they can act and how south they can act in Lebanon.
Okay, let's put it this way then. Let's check. So I'm not saying Turkey's going to go to southern Lebanon, guns a-blazing and launching missiles, but I am saying that Turkey will get involved somehow, whether it's under the scenes diplomatically, whether it's peacekeeping troops that are explicitly told not to be offensive in attacks. I don't know, but Turkey would somehow be involved in this. And I think the more things deteriorate, the more Turkey would get directly involved. And I think that this is a red line for Turkey and the Turkish government, is they cannot let Syria fall back into chaos.
One last point of observation I want to make here. Although Netanyahu is going guns blazing, he is not just politically, he is militarily and strategically injured after October 7th. The fact he is making all of these gung-ho pronunciations actually reflect his US sponsorship more than his internal innate power. This is a lot of bravado. Okay. Anything further, Danny, you'd like us to address?
What do you mean by sandbox?
Meaning, you mean Lebanon being a sandbox?
Yes, for Hezbollah prior to this.
I mean that the US put Lebanon under economic pressure.
Yes.
And prevented any help, whether international or regional, to support its economy beyond preventing it from complete free fall. That put the political structure in Lebanon under pressure. So what that meant is Hezbollah could continue to dominate Lebanon, but in a depressed state where it cannot exercise much influence outside Lebanon or pose challenge to anyone else beyond Lebanon.
I see. Okay, I understand.
That's what I meant by sandbox.
Interesting.
But then they moved it from the sandbox to the ongoing march that we have right now.
I got it.
Okay, good.
Good. Thank you, Shabab.
Okay, yeah.
See you in 2 weeks.
Assalamu alaikum.
Good. All right, walaikum salam.
Salam.